if we stick on Hitler for just a minute, what lessons do you take from that time? Do you think it's a unique moment in human history, that World War II? I mean, both Stalin and Hitler, is it something that's just an outlier in all of human history in terms of the atrocities, or is there uh, lessons to be learned? We mentioned offline that you're not just a student of the entirety of the history, but you also are fascinated by just different like policies and stuff. Like, what's the immigration policy? What's the policy on science? And
well, look, Third Reich in Power. Let me plug it by Richard Evans. I think is what it was, because that actually will tell you like what was it like to live under the Nazi regime without the war. Yeah, it's a hard question in terms of the lessons that we can learn, because there's a lot, and it's actually been over-indexed almost. I mean, everything comes back to Hitler in a conversation. So I kind of think of it within Mao, Stalin, and Hitler as, I don't want to say payments for, but like the end point payment for the sins and the problems of the monarchical system that evolved within Europe, basically like 1400 and more. I basically think that 1400, the wars between wars between France, England, the balance of power, eventually World War I, and then serfdom within Russia, the Russian Revolution that birthed Stalin, same thing, the Kaiser and Imperial Germany, and this like incredibly crazy system of balance of power in World War I, and then same thing within China in terms of the warring states, and then the disintegration, the European, how this is how they think of it, which is like the century of humiliation, and they had to have something like this. I try to think of it within the context of that. I don't want to sound like an inevitabilist, but I think of it as, I like to think about systems, especially here in DC. That's why I got into politics, which is that you have to understand systems of power and the incentives within systems and the disincentives and the downside risk of what you're creating, because that is what leads and creates the behavior within that system. I was just talking to my girlfriend about this yesterday. It's kind of funny, like, I read these, I'm obsessed with these books by Robert Caro, the biographies of Lyndon Johnson. He's written like 5,000 pages so far, and it's still not done. Yeah. Okay, so like these are like books I base my life on. And look, these are Washington and the story of the post-New Deal era and forward. Not much has changed. Like, the Senate is still the Senate. So many of the same problems with the Senate are still there. In some cases, no, not anymore. But for a while, some of the people who were there with Johnson are actually still. One of them is the president of the United States. Just a joke. And you think about also, same with the media relationship, right? Like, there's this media they may have come and gone. Like the people who were in the media and who were cozy with the administration officials. I mean, they just recreated themselves. It's like this. It's like an ecosystem which doesn't change. And that's why I'm like, oh, it's not that was a specific time. That's just DC. Like, that is DC because of the way the system is architected. It's pretty much been that way since like 1908, whenever Teddy Roosevelt was dining with these journalists and he would yell at them, and then he would go over to the Society House, and like, in many ways, that's now, instead of going to Henry Adams's house, like, the people are congregating in Calorama, which is the richest neighborhood here, at somebody else's house. Like, it's the same thing. So you have to think about the system and then the incentives within that system about what the outcomes that they're producing, if you actually want to think about, how can I change this from the outside? That's also why it's very difficult to change, because the system is designed in order to produce actually pretty specific outcomes that can only be changed in extraordinary times.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's hard to predict what kind of outcomes will result from the incentive, the system that you create, right?
Right.
In the case, because especially when it's novel kind of situations, Trump actually created a pretty novel situation, and a lot of the things that we've seen in the 20th century were very novel systems where people were very optimistic about the outcomes, right? And then it turned out to not have the results that they predicted.